Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Selichot program and service. I feel very, very privileged that my husband, Jordan Lund, was willing to do a reading and a two-man play as a sort of prompt for some thoughts during this holiday season. So without further ado, we will begin with, we're going to begin with a story called The Jew of Home Depot by Max Apple. We've edited it a bit so that it's not as long as it would otherwise be, but you get the gist of it. It's a Hasidic Jewish family from Brooklyn relocates to Marshall, Texas, in order to help a wealthy businessman realize his dying wish to spend his final months among religious Jews. The younger children are happy living in a mansion large enough for 5 families, but the eldest son is having a tough time in the new world. He becomes the family's breadwinner when he goes to work at Home Depot. While the father offers the wealthy man spiritual guidance, the rest of the family place their lives on hold for a stranger. And so we will watch the reading that Jordan does of this short story.
The old man in Marshall, Texas, phoned the Chabad organization in August 1980. He got right to the point. "I'm 85 and dying," Jerome Baumgarten said, "and I'm surrounded by Gentiles. If you could send me a bunch of real Jews, I'll pay their way and make it worth their while." When the director of the Special Projects Office offered the performance of this good deed to Reb Avram Hirsch and his family of 8 daughters and 1 son, Reb Avram accepted without hesitation. His daughters, his wife Malka, and the Hirsch children packed hurriedly, as if in an emergency. They didn't disconnect the cooking gas or the telephone line, and the younger girls, none of whom had been traveled beyond New Jersey, were excited to be on an airplane, and after that on a Greyhound bus, all on the same day. In the lobby of the Hotel Marshall, their benefactor awaited them in a green velvet chair. He wore both suspenders and a belt, which flapped against his shrunken waist. The family stood before him as if he was their commanding officer. Mr. Baumgarten raised himself from the chair unaided, although a bellman stood by, close and at the ready. "Shalom," Mr. Baumgarten called out. He pointed out the flag of the Republic of Texas on the pole next to the American flag, and then he looked carefully at the family. "Are all these children from the same mother?" he asked. "Thanks to God," Reb Avram said. Chaim, the 18-year-old son, noticed that their benefactor wore garters on his shirt sleeves, making the sleeves puff out at the elbows. The girls whispered to one another in Yiddish that Mr. Baumgarten was so skinny and the waistband of his trousers so large that he looked like a straw standing in a glass of milk. He had a full head of white hair and a voice that treated everyone as if they were more deaf than himself. "I'm sitting here facing forever, and I don't know anything about it. And that's why I asked for you, for pious Jews, for my own kind to be with me now." Reb Avram moved closer to Mr. Baumgarten. "Do you know the Hasidic song, 'The whole world is a narrow bridge and the most important thing is not to be afraid'?" "Never heard of it," Mr. Baumgarten said. Reb Avram began to sing the Bratislav melody, and his family joined him. "I am afraid, that's true enough," Mr. Baumgarten said, "but I don't understand the language." The Hirsches stopped singing. "My family and I are here to help you. You won't be alone," Reb Avram said. "Good," Jerome Baumgarten said, "but I've never been much for singing." When the family left the hotel, Ural, the bellman, who seemed almost as old as Mr. Baumgarten, led them to their temporary home. The Hirsches followed him along Main Street 4 blocks beyond what Ural said was the college to Fraternity Row, a street of 3-story houses, each one labeled at the front with Greek letters. Ural stopped in front of a white Victorian with a wraparound porch and balcony. "Mr. Baumgarten's house is the only private one. The rest is all Greeks," he said. The family stood in front of the house, not daring to follow Ural as he climbed the porch steps and then unlocked the front door. He waved for them to follow him. Reb Avram went first. He took a mezuzah from his pocket, applied Velcro to its back, and mounted it on the doorpost. He kissed the mezuzah with his fingers and then nodded for the rest of the family to follow him into their new quarters. "There's a lot of house here," the bellman said. "I can't believe it's all for us," Malka said. "In Brooklyn, 5 families could live in a house like this." And they entered slowly, the children speaking in whispers as if they were in a library or a museum. They touched the oak paneling of the living room walls. They checked the bottoms of their shoes to be certain that they weren't marking the polished wood floors or staining the Persian carpets. Only on the upper floors did the Hirsch girls speak aloud, claiming bedrooms for themselves, flushing toilets, looking for secret passages. The girls and their parents took the 5 bedrooms. Chaim had to himself the entire 3rd floor. And it was there, while looking through a window in the attic of Mr. Baumgarten's house on his first night in Marshall, Texas, that Chaim saw the forbidden. At first he thought it was a fantasy, a vision of bleached bones like the prophet Ezekiel had seen. Chaim turned his back to the window he had opened to let fresh air into the musty attic bedroom. As he pulled the window closed, he heard her name, Laura. Then he sat down on the thin mattress and watched her. He tried to think of holy things, the parting of the Red Sea and the wondrous burning bush, but even as his mind conjured up the sacred fire, his eyes took on the form of the beautiful Shiksa Laura across the driveway with a man in the Phi Kappa Delta house. Revulsion filled his soul, but as she played the harlot, Chaim watched. The next morning, he went to his father, just as Reb Avram was hurrying to leave for the hotel, where he had already begun to instruct their patron in Jewish law and custom. Chaim, like his father, stood over 6 feet tall, and had a light complexion and reddish hair. Mr. Baumgarten had been surprised by their appearance and size. "I expected undernourished types like I see on the calendar pictures," he told Reb Avram. "But you and your son, you look like linebackers." "Father, I'd like to return home," Chaim said. Reb Avram opened his hands in wonder. "The 2nd day here, and already you want to go home. Now, I would expect this from Feigele, from a 3-year-old, but not from you." "I'm not comfortable," Chaim said. "Please, you're not comfortable for a day or 2. But think of Mr. Baumgarten, who has not been comfortable for 80-some years, who has never had a minyan or kosher food or any Jewish learning. Think of him, and maybe you'll become comfortable." "I'm trying," Chaim said. "Try more," Reb Avram said. Chaim knew, of course, about what happened between men and women. Even before his bar mitzvah, his father had instructed him, and they had studied together the laws of female purity. At that time, Reb Avram had pointed out exactly why a pious man wears a ritual belt around his midsection. Those things that happen below, those are the ways that a man is like an animal. So we mark the difference by wearing a belt. Animal below the waist, but the image of God above. At the age of 13, Chaim began wearing a black string belt, but only during his waking hours. Now that he needed to be reminded that he was created in the image of Hashem, he kept it on at night as well. From his tiny window, like those he had seen in pictures of sailing ships, he looked directly into the room of one of the brothers of Phi Kappa Delta. On the walls in the room across the driveway, Chaim saw photos of movie stars and football players. These distractions did not affect him, nor did the music and the occasional yelling that came from the fraternity. Brooklyn had accustomed him to noise. While Chaim suffered in private from his family's hasty journey to Texas, his mother worried openly about the situation of Mindel. The firstborn Hirsch also a redhead, and like a second mother to her sisters. Mindel had received a marriage proposal from Yossi Goodman, an eye doctor from the Bensonhurst neighborhood. Mindel had returned from meeting her prospective mate at the Kennedy Airport passenger lounge to tell her mother and waiting sisters that Dr. Goodman said that he was ready for the next step. But when Reb Avram met the eye doctor, he withheld his permission. "I've heard that 3 girls have already turned him down," Reb Avram said. "There must be something that's not right. Let's wait until I find out more." "Well, maybe there's something wrong with those girls, not him," Mindel said. "I like Dr. Goodman, Father. I'm sure he'll be a good husband to me." "Well, maybe so, but a little later you can still like him. It doesn't have to be such a hurry. The man is 33 years old and you're 19, and that's also something to think about." Then, while Reb Avram was still considering the match for his firstborn, the sudden move to Texas put the eye doctor on the back burner. And Mindel reluctantly accompanied her family to Texas, but she took no interest in their new surroundings. While the younger girls made themselves at home in Mr. Baumgarten's linen closet and traded bed coverings, while they helped their mother boil cutlery and chop vegetables, Mindel liked to walk through the town, imagining herself a young matron on her way to a certain eye doctor's office. Late in the day, after she had finished washing the dinner plates, she liked to sit on the front porch the way people did on much smaller porches in Crown Heights. As she daydreamed of her future, the fraternity boys who passed by to a man treated Mindel with respect. They called her sister, and some attempted to bow, and others put their hands together as if they were praying rather than greeting a neighbor. "They're so polite to my face," she told her mother. "And then at night they scream and drink beer. What's the matter with them?" Malka urged her daughter to ignore their neighbors. For the first Shabbat in Marshall, Reb Avram awoke before dawn on Friday morning and at the farmer's local market bought 4 plump chickens. With Chaim's help, he hung them upside down from a low branch in Mr. Baumgarten's spacious backyard and slit their throats according to the laws of kashrut. Behind the fence that separated the Hirsch family from the Phi Kappa Delta house, several fraternity brothers watched the ritual slaughter in silence. The girls picked feathers from the carcasses and then helped their mother clean the house and cook for the Sabbath meal. Just before sunset, with all the Hirsches assembled on the porch overlooking Fraternity Row, Mr. Baumgarten arrived. He drove his own car and parked the white Cadillac without difficulty. And then he invited everyone to the curb to have a look at his custom interior. He allowed the girls to run their fingers over the saddle leather seats, engraved like branded cattle with a letter B in a circle. "That upholstery is a stupid waste of money, I know it, and so is a caddy," Mr. Baumgarten said. "But when a person's alone and he has no heirs and he's surrounded by car dealers and ranchers, this is what can happen to him." As they lit the candles and all the girls stood before him scrubbed for the Sabbath queen, and as the older ones rose to help their mother serve or to attend to their little sisters, Mr. Baumgarten said, "I sold diamonds my whole life, Reb Hirsch, but you have created diamonds." And when the Hirsch family gathered in the living room to sing Sabbath hymns, Mr. Baumgarten tried to hum along with the choral repetitions. "Is this what it'll be like in the world to come? Will the souls spend all day and all night and all of forever singing?" "About the next world, nobody knows for sure," Reb Avram said, "but the rabbis tell us that the Lord's Tish, his Sabbath table, is as long as the distance from the earth to the moon. And there's a seat for everyone that has ever lived. And Hashem sits there so far removed that none can see him. But everyone feels his presence as if he's right beside you, handing you a spoon to taste your soup to see that it's not too hot." "And will I be sitting at that tish?" Mr. Baumgarten asked. "Don't you have to be a saint to be that close to the Lord?" "Of course not," Reb Avram said. "There are no saints. We don't believe in saints. All people make mistakes." "You know what I'll say if I'm at that table?" Mr. Baumgarten announced. I'll say that I am the son of a Lithuanian peddler who settled in Yell County and thought that Arkansas was already heaven. And now, here I am at the right hand of the Lord. Hard to believe, isn't it? The assembled Hirsch family all disagreed. It was not hard to believe. When I was a young man, Jerome Baumgarten said, allowing his mind to wander, when my father settled in Arkansas, nobody paid much attention to things down there, well, except for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He came to the hot springs because the water helped his legs. I suppose that Franklin Roosevelt, sitting at the Lord's table, probably all the important dead people are. You don't have to be important, Reb Avram said. How important you are in this world doesn't matter. The man who sells pencils and shoelaces on the street corner, in the world to come, he can be just as important as the president. Since the age of 7, Chaim had been studying all day at a yeshiva. Sometimes he came home after everyone was asleep and ate alone and went off the next morning to study before the girls awoke for school. So when he lost weight and his eyes darkened from lack of sleep, his sisters, not accustomed to seeing him, noticed nothing different about their brother, who, day by day, plotted a route around sin. He moved his bed to the other side of the attic and then found himself at 1 a.m. sitting beside the window, his arms around his knees, rocking his body without any memory of having left his bed. At the pharmacy on Main Street, he bought over-the-counter sleeping pills and tried one. And the next day, 2 tablets, without relief or sleep. He threw the pills away, afraid that he might accidentally overdose. His death would be a relief, but he didn't want to embarrass his family, who would never be able to overcome such an incident. And when he moved his bed back to the window, he considered it an act of finality, as if he had been buried, and in that corner of the cemetery, reserved for suicides and murderers. Still, he tried to overcome the evil impulse. In the basement of the house, Chaim found black fabric in an old steamer trunk. He carried the fabric and a roll of duct tape to the 3rd floor. He doubled and redoubled the fabric until it was as thick as his hand, and then he secured it to the brick wall with 3 layers of tape. And that night, with his head beneath the blocked windows, he saw nothing. The darkness was so severe that when he turned off his lamp, it was as if, in punishment, Hashem had blinded him. And whenever he felt temptation, he recited the words of David the king, who asked forgiveness after looking upon Bathsheba. Have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, according to the multitude of thy tender mercies, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from mine iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. He repeated the psalm until he fell asleep. But after midnight, when on weekdays even Fraternity Row grew somewhat quiet, he was certain that he heard her voice. Chaim sat up and looked at the obstructed window, reciting again the words of King David over and over, until the psalm fell lifeless on his tongue, because neither the words nor the barrier he had constructed stopped his mind from lusting after what he could not see. He pulled at the duct tape until his knuckles bled, and when the layers of tape did not come away at once, he tore through the cloth. His bleeding fingers gripped the fabric, and his breath clouded the window. He had abandoned the tree of life, the 613 commandments, and even the 7 laws of decency from the time of Noah. All this so that he might look at Laura, her arms and legs visible in the moonlight. His pleasure as nothing compared to his shame. Mr. Baumgarten had paid their travel expenses and had suggested to the Chabad officials and to Reb Avram himself that the Hirsch family would benefit immensely from his estate. But at the moment, Reb Avram and Malka, after paying the deposit on the utility bill, had barely enough money for food. Reb Avram nervous about asking for a stipend, arrive early at the hotel on Monday morning of their third week in Texas. Now, before he decided to act, Chaim walked 4 times to Home Depot without entering the building. On the 5th trip, he tried to pretend that he was looking for something. At the end of each aisle, he stopped to see if she was visible from where he stood. He examined every section of the store without finding her, but he knew she worked there. He'd seen her wearing the orange apron with the name of the store. When he applied for a job and learned that the only opening was in lumber, Chaim gratefully accepted. Mr. Evans showed him how to use the power saw and gave him gloves and a pair of safety goggles. Then he handed Chaim some lumber scraps and called out dimensions. As his job interview, Chaim had to slice 11 chunks of timber to exact size as the assistant manager watched and approved. Almost at once, Chaim liked the sound of the power saw and the smell of wood chips. Mr. Evans trusted him with the saw, and from the first day, people told him details of their lives, how many bathrooms they had, and why they needed to save money by doing their own carpentry. The customers were also Chaim's teachers. Sometimes they had plans and pointed not only the material needs, but how to read their diagrams and their blueprints. Because every project was new to him, Chaim paid careful attention. He memorized the words they used: fascia board, plywood, sheetrock, and he learned to tell by observing the grain of the lumber which was the best grade. The first week at Home Depot, Chaim earned, even after taxes and deductions, $507. And his mother announced the amount to the girls and treated Chaim as the family hero. Reb Avram also showed his pride, but Chaim felt guilty, as if he was supplanting his father, taking Avram Hirsch's place while his father was still alive and youthful and vigorous. Now, when there were no customers and he had time to consider the entire domain of the lumber department, Chaim sometimes thought of Solomon, not as the great king of Israel, but as a builder, a buyer of materials, someone discussing with his advisors, as if in a biblical version of Home Depot, the best way to arrange blood drainage for the sacrifices, or the proper height for the altar, or the heft and quality of the timber carted down from Lebanon. According to Midrash, Solomon kept 425 horses in his stable, and Chaim was attempting to figure in his head how many square feet Solomon would have needed for those horses when, from above or from beside the plywood or from heaven itself, although he knew otherwise, he heard the voice of Laura. "Hey," she said, "I know you, don't I, from Fraternity Row?" She smiled. "I didn't recognize you at first. Without your hat and stuff." Chaim Hirsch stood numb. After all he had observed, here she stood not 2 feet from his gloved hands in aisle 14. Like Chaim, she wore a name tag. On his own tag, he'd asked to have inscribed Al. Since he didn't want to explain continually to the citizens of Marshall how to pronounce his name. "Well, hi, Al," she said, stuck out her hand to greet him. Chaim removed one glove, and then the other glove, and then his protective eyewear. Her hand remained extended, offering friendship. It was forbidden for a Hasidic male to touch a female, even casually, for a handshake. His father often said, "When confronted with this situation, I shake with my heart, not with my hand." But for Chaim, no such phrase came to mind. He accepted her hand, reached for it, almost squeezed it in his eagerness. "Hey," she said again, and then, "Nice to meet you." She asked about plywood. On her break, she was looking around, thinking about building a simple bookcase. Well, it seems stupid to buy a bookcase when I work here, doesn't it? I don't mind just stacking my books on the floor, but I got so many, it's really getting to my roommate, She's getting a little weirded out. He didn't know. The roommate he thought she meant was the one he saw her with through the fraternity's unshaded third-floor window. But she only visited the fraternity. Somewhere she had her own room and a female roommate. He'd never thought about that. It made her seem so normal. He offered to cut the wood. Oh, I don't have the measurements yet, just looking around. A cashier never sees anything from up front, just people in a hurry to get away. Sometimes I like to wander around on my break like a customer. If I smoked, I'd probably go outside with some of the other girls. It's funny you working here too, isn't it? He didn't know what she meant. He put his gloves back on because Mr. Evans had warned him to do so. Why is it funny, he asked after pausing longer than he wished he had. Not really funny, a coincidence. I mean, both of us working here. How long you been here? My second week, he told her. Do you like it? Yes, he said. She laughed and seemed to wave at him with her hair as if it was a kind of hand. I think it's so boring. Sometimes I feel like I'll just go nuts waiting until 8:57. I'm just standing there counting the seconds. But maybe it's different back here if you're sawing and stuff. What's your favorite kind of wood? She laughed again and leaned against a bin of dark quarter-inch paneling as if standing had taken all her energy and she needed to take a break from it. He noticed against the background the luster of her brown hair, the gray in her eyes, that she wore glasses and a barrette and a blue sweater with a dipping neckline and a pin above her breast. He'd never thought of the parts of her before, never seen her as a real human being, only as a creature of his evil impulse who performed acts to torment him because he had pulled down the black cloth and chosen to look upon unclean things. Come on, she teased. You must have a favorite wood. I even have a favorite price. I like $19.99 and don't ask me why. Cedar, he said. Would that be good for a bookcase, do you think? She looked at her watch. Well, can you show me some real quick? I'll come back another time with the dimensions and make sure that Jack borrows a pickup. Oh, well, we don't have any, he said. There's some packaged cedar in the container department, I think. It's on aisle 7. People use it to keep moths away. Well, I don't have any moths in my books. See you later, she said. As she walked down aisle 14, Chaim knew the truth was exactly the opposite. Later was when he would see her. Twice a week, Mindel wrote to Dr. Goodman. She read the letters first to Malka for her mother's approval. She told him about the terrible heat broken only by fierce electrical storms that sounded like the end of the world, but only cooled the city for an hour. She related at length the visit of the school compliance officer, Mr. Trellis, who came right to the Hirsch's door to find out why there were 5 residents at this address between 6 and 16 who were not going to school as the law required. She told him that her parents were afraid of the forms and the tests for the girls that had to be marked using only a number 2 pencil for the math and a dark ink for the writing. But the girls were not afraid, and Mr. Trellis, he came back himself to show Mama the scores and tell her that he wished every girl in Marshall could have this kind of homeschooling with girls who knew 2 languages and had no desire for drugs and no worries about teen pregnancy. Well, that you shouldn't write, her mother said. But that's what Mr. Trellis said. You heard him. Yes, but you don't write that in a letter. Dr. Goodman answered twice. The first letter to apologize for having no time to write. The second time to tell her that the waiting time for an appointment with him had now stretched to 2 weeks, although for an emergency he would always stay late. He sent regards to her family and hoped that soon she would return and that with God's help, all would be well between them. When the letter marked with a red personal only on the envelope arrived, Malka told her daughter to open it right away. But Mindel said she wanted to save it for the Sabbath, since it was already Friday afternoon. She left the envelope unopened, as if it was merely an advertising flyer. although she glanced at it every few minutes while she helped her mother cook and set the table. Shortly before covering her eyes for the blessing over the candles, she sliced the letter open with a knife. Malka warned the other girls not to touch it as Mindel placed the envelope near her father's prayer book. Her sisters tried not to tease her as she put on the blue dress that she wore on Rosh Hashanah, and they granted her privacy on Saturday morning when she finally took the typewritten page into her hands to learn that the optometrist, Yossi Goodman, wished her good health and long life and hoped that she would be able to return to wish him a mazel tov upon his engagement to Elke Frimmer of Bensonhurst. Mindel folded the letter and replaced it in its envelope. Her sisters roamed in and out of the living room that each Shabbos the Hirsches converted it to a chapel by pushing the couch against the wall and bringing in chairs from the dining room. Mr. Baumgarten participated from the couch as Chaim and Reb Avram read from the Torah and chanted the service in Hebrew, stopping to explain whenever Mr. Baumgarten asked a question. Mindel listened to the chanting from the empty dining room while looking at herself in the mirror. She ignored her sister's pleas to know the contents of the letter. Only after lunch and just before she left, without telling anyone, did Mindel whisper to Esther that he didn't wait for me. By 4 p.m, when all the girls were worried, Malka told her husband what had befallen their daughter. "Where is she?" he asked. He was almost ready to call the police when, long after dark, Mindel returned, her hair in her eyes, her Rosh Hashanah dress looking as if she had rolled in the dirt. Before her father could beg her forgiveness, she kissed the top of his head, and from her pocket she removed and placed on the table beside him $2.54 in coins. She hugged her sisters one by one, quickly drank the juice that her tearful mother handed to her. "You can all stop crying," she said. "There's nothing wrong. Look." She pointed to the coins. Beginning the next day, Reb Avram each morning asked Hashem to forgive his mistake, and every evening he knew there was no forgiveness, because Mindel spent her time walking through the campus and nearby streets, her eyes lowered, gathering, coin by coin, what she called her dowry. Reb Hirsch shook himself from attending to the dying man for one day to travel 4 hours by bus to Fort Worth to conduct an adult education class. 3 Fort Worth residents attended. They marveled at the rabbi's knowledge, but wished that he could speak more clearly and in a way that they could understand. For this service, and for his careful attention to any rips in the prayer shawls and irregularities in any other ritual objects of Congregation Beth Israel, the synagogue paid Reb Hirsch $200 plus bus fare, enough to keep the family equipped with electricity and gas for another month, so long as they refrained from using air conditioning. In his daily prayers, Reb Hirsch gave thanks to the congregation in Fort Worth for this assistance and to the Creator of the universe who allowed the Hirsches to live in an area that had such a mild climate. Finally, on the last day in September, 4 weeks after the Hirsches arrived in Marshall, Laura reappeared at the Home Depot lumber aisle. She had written the dimensions for her bookcase on a scrap of paper, which she held cupped in the palm of her right hand, and read aloud to Chaim the length in feet and inches as he cut with trembling hands to exact size. Her boyfriend, Jack, stood waiting with the lumber cart. He wore a Southern Tech cap with a long visor, which shrouded his face. Laura had asked for cedar, but settled for oak. When Chaim turned off the power saw, and Jack was already on his way to the checkout lanes with the cut wood, she pushed up on the balls of her feet to touch Chaim's cheek with her lips. As the Sabbath table that evening, Chaim barely paid attention to their benefactor. While the family sang the grace after meals, Mr. Baumgarten, ever more confident of the tune, rhythmically chanted the names of nearby Arkansas counties instead of Hebrew words. Carroll and Newton, he sang out, and Searcy and Yale and Van Buren and Cleburne and Scott and Sebastian. When Mr. Baumgarten finally released the family from the table, Chaim hurried upstairs to the windows of his disgrace. The room across the driveway was dark, but he knew that meant nothing. Later they would turn on the dim red lamp that he had come to expect. By 11, he began to doze as he waited. But he awoke at 11:30 and again 10 minutes later to see that the room remained dark. He wondered if Laura had stayed home to put her bookcase together. He could ask her about it the next time he saw her. Maybe he'd start the conversation, instead of waiting for her. He might say something like, casual, hey, how's that bookcase of yours doing? He practiced saying it aloud, quietly. This was not his way of talking, so he didn't know if it would sound natural. At the yeshiva, sitting across the desk from his study partner Yitzhak, he would have been able to discuss logically whether a circumstance like his situation with Laura qualified as coveting a neighbor's wife. Well, he might have questioned, whether the fraternity man was a neighbor. Jack apparently lived in the house, but if he had not signed a lease in his own name, maybe technically he wasn't a neighbor. And to whether Laura was a wife, that Chaim doubted. Although, who could know? Maybe they had a certificate of marriage. That she acted as his wife, of that, there was no doubt. So if she acted the wife, was she not a wife? And Chaim coveted also, without a doubt. Therefore, he was in violation of the 8th commandment, the coveting. That was the violation, worse than the looking and even more impossible to stop. The white fluorescent light across the driveway cut short his reverie. Laura stood at the window, looking into the darkness. She reached to the wall to turn her light switch on and off several times, as if testing the fixture for a defect. Another subject, she might talk to him about at work. In case she asked, he'd check the fluorescent bulb aisle first thing on Sunday, so that he'd have some information for her. Her light remained off for a few minutes, and then she stood at the window again, now dressed only in her Home Depot apron. Chaim watched as she pulled it up over her waist and chest, and then held the garment in front of her face, as if to keep her eyes from him. Then she flicked off the lights, and when she returned from darkness once more, Laura wore no apron, and with closed eyes, she waved to him. Chaim did not remove his gaze, even when he saw in the room behind her the laughing faces of the Phi Kappa Delta boys. He looked until they, too, came to the window and waved. Only then could Chaim finally turn aside. And in that moment, he understood that he would not return to the Shiva, and that these weeks in Marshall had already changed his life forever. But even a quarter of a century later, when Chaim strayed so far from the ways of his fathers that the Sabbath itself seemed a dream, he could not be certain whether on that last Saturday in Marshall, when in the late afternoon he had quietly closed the door of Mr. Baumgarten's house and looked into the living room toward their benefactor on the leather couch, whether he had seen his sister, Mindel, holding a pillow over the old man's face, or if his acquaintance with evil had led him to imagine even this.
So I'd like to just take a few minutes to talk about the story in light of Selichot, the idea of apologies and forgiveness. So who do you think in this story needs to ask for forgiveness? Anybody have any thoughts about that? Judy, I see you're aiming to unmute yourself. No? There you go.
Still cogitating. It seems ironic because the motivating act of the story is Mr. Baumgartner's need to be in touch with pious Jews before he dies. But then the focus of the story becomes the fall, in a sense, of Rev Hirsch's son, only son. So there's a kind of irony there about what you think the focus is going to be. Nothing is ever said about Mr. Baumgartner and whether he found the comfort he was looking for, or the sense of being Jewish, or the understanding of the world to come, or any of the things he was concerned about. So that's interesting to me.
Yeah, that's that structure. Good point. Good point. Yeah. I guess the question is it the son, of course, in the beginning feels like he's fallen, right? Because he's given into temptation. This beautiful woman across the street, and she's undressing and she's having sex and all that. And he knows he's not supposed to look, but he's tempted. And not only that, that leads him to finally abandon his tradition and his faith and all of that, right? Is that liberation, or is that abandonment of your tradition? Should he be asking his father for forgiveness, or should his father be asking him for forgiveness? Because his father sort of helped to lead him astray, right? Bringing him to Texas. You know, he might have done it anyway. Who knows? But and then what about Mindel? Mindel, the one who was fiancé to an optometrist. Somebody have some thoughts about her and her father, her relationship? Oh, Martha, go ahead, Martha. Martha Miller had her hand raised, so. Martha, are you unmuted? We can't hear you if you're speaking.
Yes.
There you are.
Okay. Well, I thought maybe the one who perhaps had the biggest forgiveness to seek would be Mr. Baumgartner himself, who selfishly in many ways, and with the hubris of someone who had money and some kind of clout during his lifetime, although he didn't have contact with Jews, had a whole family move, in a sense, to support him as he got older with some contact with Judaism. But it seemed that there was a deal there that he never fulfilled, at least clearly, during the time the story existed, where not only did they all move and do this for him, but he didn't do his part. He didn't support them at all. They had to work, and you know, they thought they would be compensated at least enough so that they wouldn't have to work, but they could be there for the purpose that he claimed they wanted him there.
Okay, Jordan wants to respond to that. I had a discussion about that with him as well, but Jordan, go ahead.
But, well, unfortunately, it's unfair.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with your audio.
Let me make sure. Go to.
I will try to paraphrase our discussion. So what Baumgarten promised the family.
Hello.
No, it's not good, Jordan.
Hello.
You have to make it louder, Jordan.
Oh, okay. Here, how about this? Can you hear me better now?
No.
Little.
How about, I just don't want it to become distorted. Is this okay or is it distorted?
Okay,
Is that okay? Can you hear me?
yes.
It's unfair to bring this up, but we did edit the story. And there is a scene that was cut from the reading, which is a scene where Reb Hirsch goes to ask for an advance, and Mr. Baumgarten basically says, I don't need 11 people, 8 daughters, 1 son, husband and wife, to work for 40 hours a week, all of them. So you have time, your family, to go get a job. You know, he said that when he dies, you know, and he was expecting to last about 4 or 5 weeks, that he was going to leave something to them that was going to be worth their while. And apparently he had this reputation in Marshall as someone who was a fair person. In reading the story, I have little doubt that he would have lived up to his, you know, expectation. But regarding Mindel, I don't know, maybe she should ask forgiveness for murdering Mr. Baumgarten? I don't know. Just a thought.
Well, we're not sure that she actually murdered him, right? The son isn't sure whether that's what he saw. But, you know, the father kind of messed up her life first by being so stringent about, you know, what kind of husband she's going to marry. And then by taking her out of the situation and telling her, hey, you know, don't worry about it. Right.
Yeah, and she sort of contrasts with Chaim or Al,
Al.
because she is trying to go the route of a traditional marriage in a conservative Jewish society, and yet, you know, and she's very willing to accept a husband who's been chosen, or as at least someone to consider in the traditional way.
Right.
But she loses out. So I take that into account too, and thinking
Gives
about
her more reason to kill her.
no.
Mitigating
No.
circumstances.
If she snaps
No,
and
but it
goes over
seems
the
to-
edge, she's at least got an insanity plea as a possibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other comments before we take a look at the play?
What about the girl? I mean, what's her name? I forget.
Mindel.
Laura.
No,
Oh, Laura.
Laura.
Oh,
she purposefully taunts him at the window. She knows he's watching and she strips naked, and then the boy's behind her.
good point. Good point.
She's a temptress.
Yeah.
But
And
she
does-
comes from a different world than Chaim does, and those worlds are really juxtaposed. He's taken out of his normal, more containing environment and is put in a situation where he sees something that he might not have seen in Brooklyn. And so, but her worldview may be totally different. She seems friendly with him at the store. I don't know, is she trying to destroy him, or is she just being herself?
Good question. Oh, Martha, do you have your hand up again?
Well, no, it never came down, I guess. Yeah, let me do something. Oh, okay. I think it went away.
No, it didn't. But anyway, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I mean, now that my hand sort of was accidentally up, I do think that that she had a kind of cavalier way of dealing with life and him that maybe was the mode of the day where her culture was, but certainly clashed grandly with how he came up. She had really no sensitivity and must have had some idea that his family was not of the Texan kind of mentality by virtue of how they dressed and what they looked like. I mean, she lived right next to them. And I think she was being kind of snarky and mean, frankly,
Okay.
you know.
All right. Interesting. All right, Jordan, last comment, and then we're going to move on to the play.
1985, small Texas town. It's a college town, and it's Fraternity Row. If anybody's ever lived in a campus or near a campus where there's a fraternity area,
Yeah.
you know that that's like basically animal behavior.
Yep.
She doesn't live at the fraternity, but her boyfriend does. She spends a lot of time there, obviously, and they had sex regularly with their open window without really a thought. I mean, before Chaim ever, ended up watching.
Right.
I don't think that she's doing anything that other than just having fun. They're just playing. These kids, these frat boys, they drink beer and they make noise and they're kind of idiots and they don't. They're not thinking about it. I want to mention just one thing about Max Apple. He taught at Rice in Houston for about 29 years. And he's done a lot of work about about Jews in Texas, but Marshall, Texas, is a real town and is currently represented in Congress by Louis Gohmert.
By who?
That's all I'll say. Louis Gohmert.
Okay. Thank you, Jordan.
So just wanted to mention.
Actually,
that it's a real town.
Carl said that his family lives right near there. So there are real people there. Okay, so thank you for your comments. All right, so this is a play called Amends, and I'd like to ask people to please mute themselves if you could. Amends is by Neil Blackadder, and it is read by Scott Luttrell and Jordan. And it's two former friends meet after many years have passed. The meeting is a request by one of them, so he can hopefully make amends for his past actions. Will they be able to settle old scores and move on? So, amends.
You mind?
Go ahead.
Let me just, okay. Hi. Yeah, okay. So, wait, listen, why don't you just take yourself someplace? Right, that diner? Sure. I'll call you when I want you to come back. Right. Bye. My driver.
Your chauffeur.
Sure. So I tried a bunch of times before I reached you. You don't have any voicemail, right?
No need.
Yeah, that sounds nice.
We prefer it that way. And often we don't pick up because there's just some robot on the other end.
I know, it's gotten so bad.
Can I get you something to drink?
Sure. What do you have? What are you having?
Well, I mostly drink whiskey these days.
Hmm?
And there's probably some beer, but it might not be in the
What
refrigerator.
kind of whiskey you got?
You mean, is it single malt?
Well, yes. For instance?
It's not. It's whiskey from the grocery store.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that sounds fine.
Huh.
On the rocks would be good.
I doubt there's any ice.
That's fine. I'm not fussy.
You aren't. You used to be.
Well, we all change, right?
You think? Yeah.
Ooh. So you said we. What's your wife's name?
Oh, we're not married.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Her name's Jenny.
She here?
No, she just left this morning, visiting a friend for a few days. So how's business?
Business, well, it's great. I mean, I'm traveling too much right now, and that gets to be a drag. It means I'm not around to oversee things at headquarters, but I got some good people here. That's important. How about you?
Alex, let's skip the chit chat. You invited yourself out here.
I
Yeah,
didn't
sure
exactly.
you did, and that's fine. You told me there's something you wanted to talk to me about in person, so let's hear it.
Okay. I'm here because I want to apologize to you.
Go on.
You hardly need me to spell out what I'm apologizing for. You know what I did, and you know how it changed things for you.
And for you,
Well, yeah, for both of us. So I came here to ask you for your forgiveness.
for my forgiveness,
Yeah.
you want me to forgive you.
Yes, that's what I'm asking of you. That's what I came out here to ask you for.
And you've been assuming I would give it to you.
I knew it would
That
be.
I would grant you my
I didn't
forgiveness.
think it would be easy for you to do it. Yeah,
You're right there.
well, I mean, I wasn't counting on it, but I thought there was at least a chance you'd accept my apology.
And why the hell should I?
Well, I'm acknowledging that I did you wrong. I mean, in a really significant way. Absolutely. No question. But it was a long time ago. Look, I can't change what I did. Can't turn back the clock. Make it all not have happened. But what I can do is I can come to you and apologize for what I did.
Are you going to get down on your knees?
I could, if that would make any difference.
No, of course it wouldn't make any difference. It would be stupid. You interfered in my life. You did me wrong in just about the biggest way anyone could. Right? Agreed?
Agreed.
And now you come along all these years later and you tell me you're sorry. Oh, well, no, wait. Yeah, you haven't actually said that, but presumably you are sorry, yes?
Yes.
So you tell me you're sorry, whatever that means. Then what I'm supposed to do is what? Thank you for your sincere apology and grant you forgiveness.
That's how it usually works.
Usually, do you think this situation happens a
Well,
lot?
not this situation, of course not. But this is how the process of apology and forgiveness typically goes.
Process of apology and forgiveness? You sound like one of your lawyers. I bet you have plenty of those these days.
You're not wrong.
I bet they're all better than the one I hired back then.
Right. You know, I think he was a bit out of his depth. Yes. Bill, it was an uneven fight. You had something I wanted, and I figured out a way to take it from you so I could have it.
Yeah, and to make sure I'd never get anything like it. A little help from your parents.
Well, to some extent, sure. But look, Bill, the point is, I feel bad. I've been feeling that way for years.
Poor thing.
And now,
Poor thing.
yeah, well, now I want to make amends, to ask for your forgiveness.
And supposing I do grant you forgiveness, then what? What do you do with that? What do I do? We agree to let bygones be bygones, no hard feelings.
That's the idea, I believe.
I'm sorry, but forget that no hard feelings. Why the hell should I forgive you? You want to be able to not only have done the shitty thing you did, but you also want to feel better about telling me you're sorry? You get to make amends, as you put it, and all I get is an apology. So you screw me over twice.
Marie was right. I was wrong.
Who's Marie?
My wife. She was sure you wouldn't accept my apology.
And you thought I would.
I told her there was a chance you might.
Apparently not.
It's a shame.
For you, maybe.
No. I meant for you.
You're telling me it's a shame for me that I refuse to grant you my forgiveness.
Well, yeah, but for reasons that you don't know about. You couldn't know about.
I don't follow.
No, I know. Look, but the thing is, I did have something more in mind than just requesting your forgiveness. I meant it about making amends. If you had accepted my apology, I would have made it up to you.
Made what up to me?
Well, compensated you as best I could for what I did back then. What I did to you meant that you didn't get that job, right? And as I understand it, it also prevented you from getting any similar jobs for many years later.
Or any halfway decent job.
Right. So I had someone on my staff, really bright young, well, anyway, I didn't tell her anything much about why, but I had her look into your circumstances, like the mortgage you took out on this place.
You had some employee of yours investigate?
Yes, well, listen, with the rate you got, I must be hard making these payments every month.
Sure, it has been sometimes.
Yeah, well, right. So I wrote a check. I have it right here. It's for, well, it's quite a lot. Enough to pay off the whole mortgage and then some. If I send this to the bank, the house will be yours and you'll have a chunk more to play with. No more mortgage payments. And that's what I was gonna do as a goodwill gesture, to make it up to you. But only if you accepted my apology. Which you didn't.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, you like being out here in the woods?
We do, yes.
Certainly was a pretty drive. But you must get tired of having to do it all the time, all those bends.
Oh, I love that road. It's straight highways that I don't like. Anyway, neither of us often goes further than the nearest town. We can get what we need there.
So what does Jenny do?
She had her own business, built it up over the years. Eventually it did really well. Then she sold it, and now we can get by on what she made from the deal.
Nice. So no rat race for you.
That's right. Thank God. Look, let's get back to what you came out here for. Help me to understand. If you felt bad about what you did to me, and you actually gone as far as finding out how much it would cost to pay off my mortgage, then why didn't you just write a check, send it to the bank? You came up with this way to compensate me, so why not just do it? Make amends.
It's not just about me.
How so?
Well, the money isn't just mine. It's my wife's too, right? I mean, I told her about this and she gets it. She just didn't want me going ahead and making this gesture. She thought, well, she thinks that you should respond in a certain way.
To show I deserve it.
Yeah, you could put it that way. She said she'd only agree to my making it up to you if you accepted my apology.
Only if I accepted your apology, or did I need to grant you forgiveness?
Oh, well, okay. Yes, you had to forgive me.
Wow, that is so appalling. You had the resources to atone for the most outrageous, unethical, self-serving act of deviousness, but you can't just do the right thing. You have to compel the person to demean himself to as if he owes you something.
Oh, but Marie, it's about the principle.
What principle? The principle that those who have should be allowed to lord it over those of us who don't?
No. The principle that forgiveness should be possible, that we shouldn't always be held accountable for all past actions, even if they happened a long time ago.
Is she a Christian?
What does that have to do with anything?
Oh, come on, these religious types. We all know what they can be like toward those of us who haven't found what they think they've found. Talk about holier than thou.
As a matter of fact, Marie is a Christian. That's a big part of who she is. Now listen, what the hell, Bill? It's not about Marie. It's about...
Yes, it is. If she's the one who set the conditions for my reparations,
Let's leave her out of it, okay? The condition thing was her idea, but I ended up seeing that she was right.
were you born again?
No.
What's she like, Marie?
She's impressive.
Impressive. Wow. I assume she's beautiful.
Oh, yeah, she is. Very attractive. And she's a great mother.
But
Did I say but?
sounded like you were about to.
Well, maybe. It's been a while since I drank like this. Look, I don't think Marie and I are so unusual. I see plenty of guys in the same kind of marriage.
What kind's that?
You're both really busy, and then there's kids, and then all of their stuff. So it ends up being sort of
Like a business operation.
I suppose so. Well, there's nothing wrong, really. It's just,
You know what? You imagined something more.
yeah, I guess. Is that what you found?
I think so.
No children, right?
No.
And you're both okay with that?
Not 100%, especially Jenny. But basically, yes.
Maybe it helps.
I think it might.
How do you spend your time?
Jenny does some consulting. We own a couple of properties that we rent out. I take care of that. Otherwise, we do a lot of hiking, hanging out with friends.
Sounds pretty nice.
It is. But things could have turned out differently.
Right.
Yeah. When you think about this stuff, you must wonder. Everybody does about other things that might have happened. Like what about before Marie? Did you ever have that something more?
Why are you interested?
Why shouldn't I be? Look, I wish she never looked me up, but you're here, so we might as well talk. Better than hearing about your business.
Fair enough. Yeah, I did have something really special. With Christine.
Christine.
Yeah, that was the real thing for me.
What happened?
I never really knew. I still don't. It's awful. I mean, all of a sudden she just pulled away, cut herself off.
From one day to the next.
And not only that, it was on the day that we were supposed to go to my parents so they could meet each other.
Wow. What did she actually do or say?
Well, not very much, really. Basically told me over the phone that she couldn't come and that she didn't want to see me anymore.
That was it?
That's bad enough. But of course, I wanted her to explain, so I pressed her, kind of ending up wishing that I didn't.
How do you mean?
She talked about how she found out who I really was, what I was really like, and how she could never be with a person like that.
Like what?
Well, basically class warfare stuff, accusing me of having used my privilege to get things that I hadn't earned, taking advantage of people who with fewer resources.
Huh.
But I'll never forget it. No, man, there was a real hostility in her voice. Contempt, really. To hear that from a woman who was in your bed only a day before.
Ouch.
Yeah. And then she literally left town, changed her number, made it more or less impossible for me to find her.
Jesus. Here, have some more.
So here we are. You turned me down. I'm not giving you the check. Instead, we're talking about our love lives. Look, I get that you don't buy into the whole forgiveness thing, but I mean, supposing you did. If you were going to apologize to anyone, who'd it be? And for what?
Me? Oh, I'd be pretty much a saint.
Yeah, right.
Let's see. I do still feel bad toward Jake Thompson in the 6th grade. I was the one who let the air out of his tires. He had to walk home. It was a long way.
Come on.
Well, I think once you're an adult, you should do what you do and stand behind it. I mean, sure, there are things I say sorry for, especially with Jenny, all the time, but little things.
There's nothing that you've always known you shouldn't have done? I have been pretty haunted by this. What I did to you?
Glad to hear it. There is one thing I'm sure some people would say that I should apologize for if they'd done it.
Let's hear.
There was this girl, woman, that I got to know just as a friend. There's never anything more between us. I don't think either of us thought there might be. And that was fine.
And so what did you do to her?
Wait. I'm getting there. It's not about what I did to her. Or only partly. She was in a relationship with somebody.
And you were jealous of him.
Exactly. First, when he was just this guy she would mention, I didn't really care. She had a boyfriend, so what? We worked together. We'd hang out and talk. It was nice. I'm not sure if she'd say the same, but for me, at the time, it was meaningful, important.
And then you met the boyfriend.
No, I never did. But I found out more about him, what type of person he was. And when I did, it pissed me off that she was with him. So I guess I felt she could do better.
So what was so terrible about him?
I could tell he was the kind of person who was used to always getting everything he wanted.
And how did you know that?
Well, partly because of his family background. They had that presumption that they would just automatically get things. The best grades, places at the best colleges, tables at the best restaurants.
They were rich. That's what you're saying.
Well,
You never could stand the rich, right? That was. So what was this guy supposed to do about being from a family like that, huh?
It's not the wealth that bothers me. It's the attitude that goes along with it. It's that edge of condescension toward the rest of the world that never really goes
Or
away.
that people like you can never stop seeing. Anyway, back to you and this woman that you supposedly didn't want to sleep with.
Well, I didn't say that, not exactly. But yeah, so I found a way to come between them, to undermine him in her eyes. Actually, wasn't hard to get her to recognize certain things about him.
Like what?
Well, she hadn't really been in contact with anyone like him before. I think that was part of the appeal, which is understandable. I mean, wealth is pretty glamorous. Even I can see that. So she'd be telling me things he said about himself, about how he managed to be so successful, as if it was all down to his hard work and creativity.
And you tell her that it was all because of his family and his connections.
Pretty much. And it was.
So what, you told her that and she split up with him?
No. If that was it, I wouldn't be telling you this. It didn't work. I couldn't stand that she was with him, so I told her something specific that I happened to know about him.
What, like some kind of shady business deal or something?
More or less.
And that was enough for her to break up with him?
It was. She moved away, which she would have done anyway, but she left sooner, kind of in a hurry.
What was her name?
I think he figured that out.
Son of a bitch.
Same to you.
And you really don't think that you should apologize for what you did to us?
Not at all. I did Christine a favor. And I'm not about to ask you to forgive me. Why would I?
Did you ever get back in touch with her?
No, not once. It's been a few years. Did you?
Oh, I know all about her, but I've never dared reach out to her.
Is she happy?
That's hard to find out, but it looks like she probably is.
I hope so.
Me too.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Interesting twist to that story, right? One man comes to ask the other man's forgiveness with a lot of problems around that apology, and it turns out that the other guy's taken his revenge, and perhaps he needs to be the one to apologize. But there are a couple of issues that came up in that the first part of it, which is, does time make a difference in terms of being able to forgive someone for something that happened? Like if it happened last year or 20 years ago, does that make a difference? Anybody have any thoughts about that? Or does money factor in a way that makes any kind of sense? Like, well, if you had granted me the forgiveness, I would have given you this money. I mean, is that like almost trying to pay off your debts in a way?
Well, the person
Judy.
who wouldn't accept the apology hadn't taken responsibility for his own happiness after all those years.
The person who wouldn't accept the apology hadn't taken responsibility?
That's the way I see it. Yeah,
Mm.
it's not a good sign that a person would be angry at another individual for years.
Well, this guy really screwed him over, apparently. He really stopped him from getting decent work and being able to have, the kind of profession that he wanted to have. It's not clear exactly what he did, but yeah, but you're right. Holding on to that for all those years is probably not the healthiest thing. Judy, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just thinking of societies that have, thinking about the societies that I learned about when I was reading Old English. There was this idea of weir guilt, or I don't know how to pronounce it anymore, but that if someone murdered somebody, for example, they would have to pay an amount of money that was supposed to cancel the act in some sense. I mean, I haven't studied this in any really profound way, but there are societies I know in which compensation is a way of preventing the act from going on forever. That may not mean in the consciousness of the society and the consciousness of the perpetrator and the victims. Now, that's very different from the way you might think about it in our own society. We have other kinds of paying for guilt, paying for sins, paying for acts that are unacceptable. But I think it's just interesting that you asked the question about, does it matter if it's a long time ago? And yes and no. I mean, if it's something that changed your life and you see that moment as the turning point that made you become what you are now, and you are not happy with who you are now, then it does make no difference. It could be 100 years and you would still feel that the issue was not resolved. But on the other hand, anger does lessen in the course of time for many people.
You would hope.
You hope. I think it does. I mean, just reflectively speaking, I think it's difficult and self-harming to maintain a state of anger
Of
indefinitely.
course. Right. Yeah.
So,
So I see it. Yeah.
yeah.
I see a couple of
that,
hands up. I just want to say that, one of the issues, and certainly in terms of Judaism and what it means to be a repentant, is that you have to change your behavior.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the questions is, does this, the part played by Jordan, has that guy really changed it all? Because he still thinks, oh, I have money and I can make it go away, right?
Yeah.
On some level.
Definitely.
Okay, Lynn, do you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Lynn Yarmoth?
I think that if anybody comes to me and it's regarding something that happened a long time ago, and that has happened. When it happened to me, I didn't even remember what they were talking about. And to make them feel better, I told them, I forgive you. But I mean, I explained to them, are you still doing this? He said, no. And I said, well, that's the important thing. I don't want you to do this anymore.
No, that is the important thing, is you're not doing it. And if you're faced with the same situation, you don't do the same thing again, right?
Yeah.
Good. Martha, is your hand up again, or is this from last time? Martha? Okay, Jordan wants to speak. So Martha, oh, there she is. And then we'll have Jordan after that. Yeah.
So I have a question about Judaism versus Christianity. And oftentimes the traditional look at forgiveness or turn the other cheek, or or eye for an eye, the difference between the two approaches. In Judaism, as it exists now, with the reality of complicated lives, etc., are we still, by nature, it's supposed to be okay to eye for an eye, or are we striving to turn the other cheek, which I always think of more Christian than Jewish, right? So where are we in the scheme of all that?
All right. Let me give you a quickie answer to that, which probably, we could spend a lot of time on it. But okay, the eye for an eye in the Torah was actually a way to limit the revenge. So for example, if I came over and knocked out your eye, your family might want to come over and kill me. And then my family will want to kill not only you, but other members of your family. So it would, as a couple of you said before, it's like you want to keep it contained so it doesn't, get out of hand and just keep growing. So that in the Torah, it actually is a step forward in civilization, because it's limiting the damage, tit for tat. But when the Talmud comes along and the rabbis in the Talmud look at this, we can't live in a society where people are pulling out each other's, ears and eyes and that sort of thing, right? So in the Talmud, they say it's actually not an eye for an actual eye. Because what if you're blind? Then it's not an equal punishment, right? If I'm blind and you're not, and it doesn't matter if I lose an eye, but it does matter to you. Or what if my profession is I'm a surgeon and you're a street cleaner? Do our eyes have the same value? So they say it's really about monetary compensation, and they have 5 different categories, medical care and humiliation and loss of work and that kind of thing. So they take it a step further. Turning the other cheek, I don't think is a particular Jewish thing. Okay, Jordan, why don't you conclude this conversation, and then we'll go on to our service.
Well, just briefly about the the deed that was done, since it's not in the script or in the text, but what we did learn in the text was something, it was so serious that he was not able to ever get another job like that, or any kind of decent job. And so it affected his future earnings completely. And so we thought we have to make some kind of deed that would have that kind of effect. So for us, we decided I had stolen his intellectual property when we were both trying to make our way as architects. And I had reported it that he had tried to steal from me. So he was prosecuted for theft of the intellectual property, and I got away with it because I was rich. So that's what we decided. Something like that has the kind of effect on someone's life for such a duration. Obviously, he got a little bit of comeuppance when he was able to hurt my relationship, but that's not something that's going to be easy to forget or to forgive. I can't imagine. So there you go. That's my.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Jordan, and thank you, Scott, for a really great performance. So we are now going to transition to our service, and we're going to begin with Havdalah. So Havdalah is not only marking the end of Shabbat, which ended a couple hours ago, but we're also transitioning from the regular year to the High Holy Days. And Selichot actually marks the beginning of the High Holidays. It's our preparation. Selichot is always the Shabbat before Rosh Hashanah. And since Rosh Hashanah is on a Monday, and the Shabbat before for Selichot has to be 3 days earlier, that's why it's a week earlier. Otherwise, it would have been next Saturday, but it's too close to Rosh Hashanah. Who knows why? But anyway, so we're going to begin with Havdalah, and we're very happy to have Elliot Levine doing the music for us tonight, and Amy Litt, his wife, who's going to light the candle and do some of the Havdalah ritual.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen lai 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei ha'esh borei ha'esh Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lechol hamavdil ben kodesh lechol ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la Eliyahu Hanavi במהרה בימינו יבוא אלינו עם משיח בן דוד, עם משיח בן דוד, אליהו הנביא, אליהו התשבי, אליהו, אליהו, אליהו הגלעדי. שבוע טוב, 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 שבוע טוב. A good week, a week of peace, with gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace, may gladness reign and joy increase.
So as we enter Selichot, Martin Buber said, God does not want to be believed in, to be debated and defended by us, but simply to be realized through us. Hashivenu, return again. Take us back, Adonai. Let us come back to you. Renew in our time the days of old. Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul. Return to who you are. Return to what you are. Return to where you are, born and reborn again. Hashivenu.
Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha, Venashuva, Venashuva, Chadesh, Chadesh, Yamenu kekedem.
The psalmist sang, at midnight I rise to give you thanks and praise. And so we come to this hour of Selichot under the canopy of night to celebrate goodness, to proclaim what is right and true, to praise, to thank, to bless the great giver who gives and renews our lives. We turn to loved ones, to friends, and to our people everywhere, the whole house of Israel, and our hearts turn toward the human family. We pray for its healing. Yet hardest of all is the inward gaze, the return to ourself, the honest reckoning of the soul, cheshbon hanefesh. We ask how to account for selfish acts, lies, and senseless anger, how to account for the shadows, the storms, the bitterness in our lives, the damage and distress we cause, how to own up to it all and find our way back with integrity in peace. We ask, have we the will to change? And if not now, when? We continue with Issa and I, a version written by Elliot Levine.
I lift up mine eyes to the mountains, from whence shall come my help. My help shall come from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. May your footsteps never falter when you sleep.
now for some personal reflection. Let's read this silently. And we continue with Shomer Yisrael.
Shomer, Shomer Yisrael, Shmo Sherit Yisrael. Shomer, Shomer Yisrael, Shmo Sherit Yisrael. Ve'al Yovad Yisrael, ve'yamoman, ve'al Yovad Yisrael, ha'omrim, ha'omrim, ha'omrim Shema Yisrael. Ve'al Yovad Yisrael, ve'al Yovad Yisrael, ha'omrim, ha'omrim, ha'omrim Shema Yisrael. Shomer, Shomer Goy Echad, Shmo Sherit Echad. Shomer, Shomer Goy Echad, Shmo Sherit Echad. Ve'al Yovad Goy Echad, ve'al Yovad Goy Echad, ha'omrim, ha'yachadim, Shimcha Adonai Echad. Ve'al Yovad Goy Echad, ve'al Yovad Goy Echad, ha'yachadim, ha'miyachadim, Shimcha Adonai Echad. Shomer, Shomer Goy Kadosh, Shmo Sherit Kadosh. Shomer, Shomer Goy Kadosh, Shmo Sherit Kadosh. Ve'al Yovad Goy Kadosh, ve'al Yovad Goy Kadosh, Hamshalshim Beshalosh Kedushat Lekadosh. Ve'al Yovad Goy Kadosh, ve'al Yovad Goy Kadosh, Hashalshim Beshalosh Kedushat Lekadosh.
Forgive Me, My God, by Mordechai Temkin. Forgive me, my God, for I spilled my life like unclean water upon the earth. Forgive me for all my wounds I caused with my own hands. And yet, sobbing like a beaten child, I cried out to you that you, my God, might bandage them. We continue with Ki Anu Amecha. We are your people.
Ki Anu Amecha, Ve'ata Eloheinu, Anu Vonecha, Ve'ata Avinu, Anu Avadecha, Ve'ata Adonenu, Anu Kechalecha, Ve'ata Chelkeinu. Anu Nachaletecha, Ve'ata Goralenu, Anu Tzonecha, Ve'ata Roenu, Anu Chanecha, Ve'ata Notrenu, Anu Fulatecha, Ve'ata Yotzreinu, Anu Rayatecha, Ve'ata Dodenu, Anu Segulatecha, Ve'ata Krovenu, Anu Amecha, Ve'ata Malkenu, ואתה ממירנו.
Our God and God of our ancestors, we are your people and you are our God. We are your children and you are our father, our mother. We are the people who serve you and you call us to serve. We are your community and you are our portion. We are your legacy and you are our purpose. We are your flock and you are our shepherd. We are your vineyard and you watch over us. We are your work and you are our maker. We are your beloved and you are our lover. We are your treasure and you are the one we cherish. We are your people and you reign over us. We offer you our words and you offer us yours. So forgive us, pardon us, lead us to atonement. And now we're going to change the covers of our Torah scrolls from the blue to the white for the high holidays.
עץ חיים היא למחזיקים בה ותומכיה מיושר דרכיה דרכי נועם וכל נתיבותיה שלום השיבנו אדוני אליך ונשובה חדש חדש ימינו חדש ימינו כקדם.
So now for the period of the high holidays, we try to reach the level of angels in our white purity. From Psalm 139, you have searched me inside and out with your beam. You have known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You think my thoughts before they arrive in my mind. You are my walking. You are my lying down. All my living is your knowing. Where could I go to be apart from you? To what place flee from your presence? Awesome is, what you are. And this I know in the secret silences of my heart, where your awesomeness dwells and embroiders me into the fabric of the physical world. Out of the slender thread only your eyes can see, recorded by your hand into the book of the world, all the days of my recordable life, even before I lived them. Search me inside and out with your beam, pour your awareness throughout my heart like honey, and find the crookedness and selfishness there, and lead me away from it on the way to your timeless time. And now we confess some of our sins. Ashamnu.
Hashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Dibarnu Dafi, Hevinu, Vehirshanu, Zadnu, Chamasnu, Tafanu Sheker, ay, 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 Ya'atznu kizavnu, latznu, maradnu, niatznu, sararnu, פשענו, צררנו, כישינו עורף, רשענו, שיחתנו, תיעבנו, טעינו, תיתנו. Ay, 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 ay.
And now if those of you at home can recite this with me, we're going to read the English of Ashamnu. And we'll read it together, although unfortunately you'll have to be muted. We abused and abandoned. We acted without thinking. We blamed others when we failed. We boasted and belittled. We coveted and corrupted. We coerced the weak to do our will. We drove away those we love with silence. We deceived and denied. We enticed and enslaved. We exalted money and material goods. We fouled air, sea, and land. We flattered and falsified. We gravitated to those who gossip. We gave up our ideals and gave in to our impulses. We hated and humiliated. We held grudges and refused to forgive. We ignored and idolized. We insisted that we were right. We judged others rashly and wrongly. We were jealous and unjust. And so we ask that God forgive us and take us back. Hashivenu again.
You unmuted us, right?
Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha,
So this is a poem by Yehuda Amichai, and it's called The Place Where We Are Right. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow. And a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. And this is from Mishkan Halev, which is the fairly new book for the high holidays, for Selichot and for the month of Elul. This is the commentary that they put in there. The Place Where We Are Right by Yehuda Amichai. This poem eloquently conveys the dangers of rigid absolutist thinking, stubbornness, and self-righteousness. A willingness to embrace uncertainty and doubt can make room for compassion, empathy, and listening to one another. An excerpt from the poem appears on the wall of the Yitzhak Rabin Center, established by the Israeli government to carry on the legacy of the visionary prime minister who was assassinated by a Jewish fanatic in 1995. So doubt, uncertainty, which might bedevil us at times, actually is something that gives us a place to grow from and to learn from. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King.
Avinu Malkeinu, Shema Kolenu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chatanu Lefanecha, Avinu Malkeinu, Chamol Aleinu, Ve'alol Aleinu, Ve'tapenu.
Avinu Malkeinu, Kalen Even, Vecherev Ve'ra'av, Me'aleinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Kalen Chosar, U'mastin, Me'aleinu.
Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Kodvenu, B'Seif El Chaim Tovim, Avinu Malkeinu, Chodesh Aleinu, Chodesh Aleinu, Shana Tova.
Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chadesh Aleinu, Shana Tova.
Avinu Malkeinu, Shema Kolenu, Shema Kolenu, Shema Kolenu.
And of course, what would Elul be like if there was no shofar? Eric Sabar is going to blow the shofar for us after I say the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lishmoa kol shofar. Blessed are you, ruler of the world, who has made us holy with commandments, and who has commanded us to hear the voice of the shofar. The shofar is supposed to awaken us to finding new ways. And Eric, I'm going to do a tekiah, and then a tekiah gedolah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Tekiah gedolah. Yasher Koach, wonderful, beautiful. Thank you, Eric. I want to thank a number of people. Elliot Levine, beautiful music as always. Amy, beautiful job with the ritual objects. Thank you so much. Jordan, thank you so much for those very meaningful performances, and thanks Scott for us. And of course, Jory Yarmoff, who is tirelessly working behind the scenes to bring us technology and the latest in how we can make our services as meaningful as possible during another little wave of COVID. We, of course, are sorry that our high holidays are going to have to be remote again, but we're hoping that in the next month or so, maybe things will tone down. They seem to be toning down a little bit already. The positivity rate in Riverside is going down. So let's just hope that that trend continues. I want to wish everybody a good week. Hopefully we'll see you next Friday. I want to remind people that we are going to bring two Afghani women, two young women who are students at the Riverside Community College, who are going to talk about the situation in Afghanistan as far as women are concerned. They've been in this country for several years. Of course, they have friends and family still over there. And we'll learn a little bit about their journey. Their family's been here for 5 years and has still not been able to get asylum status. So if you want to talk about bureaucratic red tape, there it is right there in front of you. So have a good week. See you next Friday, if not, at least next Monday for Rosh Hashanah. And good night to everybody.
Night. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Right.
Healthy one.